morning. Today I'll just go through a potential new sampling technique and the methods behind that. This potential new sampling technique is currently known as rapid sampling. It constitutes the selection of a particular habitat type, the selection of 15 individual points within that habitat type, and 10 species from each of those points. It works with a combination of photography and citizen science, as pictures of 10 of each of those species within each of those sites, each of those points, will be uploaded to iNaturalist for identification. From that, we have a floristic list of the area, as well as a proxy for abundance, being how many times each species is found across those sites. So currently I'm at the Nelson Mandela University Nature Reserve. Vegetation type here is St. Francis dune thicket and dune fynbos mosaic. What I'm looking at currently is a patch of fynbos, quite mature, actually fairly moribund. There was a big fire in 2017, but it seemed to have missed this small patch. And see a lot lower on the other side where the fire did burn. The white, conspicuous white flowering Metalasia muricata, very tall, lots of dry and dead material. So the purpose of selecting this site was to firstly do a 10 by 10, which uses identification of each of the species occurring in that 10 by 10 plot, as well as estimated abundance, and comparing how the data changes when doing a rapid sampling technique in that area. So the first thing for the 10 by 10 plot is to mark out the 10 meter quadrat. It's not marked out here. The stakes have already been taken out. But the next thing will be to list all species found in there. So I'd go around and look at, for example, this Passerina corymbosa, the endangered Rapania juliana, Cape dwarf beech, endemic to this particular patch of coast, with the false dodder, Cassisa seriolata from the Lauraceae, vining over this Morella quercifolia. So sort of an inventory will be made of all of these species, and then an estimated abundance cover value given to it. So the Morella is fairly dominant in here, and you can, for instance, give it an estimated abundance cover of 15%. That will be similar to the cover for the Passerina, and perhaps for this Coleonema pulchillum. So this is the Coleonema, a member of the Buchu family, the Rutaceae, the citrus family. Very aromatic glands in the leaves, so it has a pleasant smell. For plants that are not as dominant and that maybe only one or two individuals occur, a standard smaller value can be given, for example 1% or perhaps even 0.1%. So here's just an example of a plant that I might give 1 or 0.1%. It's the only one I've seen within the 10 meter plot. This is a Crassula ericoides, and that's in contrast to something a lot more common like this Erica glumiflora. Only one of 2 Erica species that would occur on this reserve, on the Port Elizabeth coast. A red listed species as well. Now the rapid sampling technique is in many ways quite similar. It also uses only those 2 sort of variables, what species is present and how abundant is it. There may be one difference is that the proxy for abundance in the rapid sampling technique is not subjective. So the first thing you have to do is sort of identify the vegetation that you'd like to sample. In this case it will be dune fynbos, so I will try not to go too far up that dune where a lot of thicket species are occurring, and I would not try and go across the path over there, because that it burned a lot more recently than the current patch of land that I'm in now. So I would select my area as being this patch of mature fynbos, maybe up until those Metallosia bushes in the background. Within there, I would select 15 points at semi-randomly, since this is quite homogeneous, and I'd perhaps meander through and try and encompass as much of the variability as possible. So I would do a few samples or a few points along this area where it's a bit flatter. I'd move maybe a little bit onto those small dune heaps there where Metallosia are getting quite tall, and I'd also try and do a few sites or a few points at the concrete pavements that are at the other end of the small patch, just to get the most topographical variation I can. Now I'll do an example of our sample 1 point. So first things, I'm on my site and I will try and identify 10 different species within arm's reach with minimal movement as possible. So for instance, I'll squat over here and my first species will be this Seligocanescens, member of the Scrophulariaceae. I do have Erica over there, so that's 2. So for each of these I'll just take a picture, and that will be my picture for iNaturalist. The Passerina corymbosa for my 3rd. Circia laevigata, the 4th species. There's also a Phylica ericoides for 5. And sometimes it can be a bit tricky to find up to 10, but I think that's the more effort that is needed just shows how thorough you could be with this method. For 6 there is a Restio species here, Restio Aleocarus. There's a grass Imperata cylindrica as well, the 7th. For the 8th there is Helichrysum littoral. Yeah, so one of the sort of potential setbacks that was thought of about this method is that the more charismatic and the more conspicuous plants there'll be a bias to sampling those, but the restricted movement really forces one to be thorough and to find that those last 2 species. So the yeah, in comparison with the 10 by 10, I think the overall species lists were quite similar, so there was no such limitation at the moment found. The 9th, there's a small Rapania juliana seedling, and for the 10th species it was a bit difficult to find it, but here's a seedling of Felicia echinata, and yeah, that takes about 4 to 5 minutes, and the amount of movement I had to do to find this was minimal, but I did have to sort of move about 50 centimeters forward just to find one more species. So the amount of movement allowed in this method is still something that has to be sort of decided, but something as minimal as 50 centimeters should be all right.